Okay, I think we are ready to start. I think we have two amazing candidates here with us today. We're broadcasting on Facebook Live. The video will be available on our website and on our YouTube and Facebook channels afterwards. So we had a forum yesterday where we've reached a lot more. We reached more people today than we did yesterday. That's sort of the way things are in this era. So I wanted to first off thank both of our candidates for coming. This is really exciting because we actually, I'm used to having candidate forums where neither candidate is actually really has much awareness of issues impacting people who are homeless and on the edge of homelessness, and you both have actually been champions in this area. So I think I've never hosted a forum like this. It's very exciting. So I would like to start off by giving you each a chance to introduce yourselves. I will be serving as a timekeeper, so I'll give you each 3 minutes and then when there's 30 seconds left, I will raise my digital hand. So does anybody have an opinion about who goes first?
I feel like Derek, because of alphabetics, has to go first off, and I'm willing to take that if you want me to, Derek, or if you're ready to go, whichever's fine by me.
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Plumb.
By the way, I think I just made up the word alphabetics. So, well, thank you for this opportunity. I'm actually up here at the University of Utah Open Union. So if there's any background noise, enjoy the kids. My name's Dr. Jen Plumb, and I am a Utah local, native, born here. Went through Salt Lake City schools, my entire kind of education career. Went away to school swearing I would never come back, and nothing like 5 years in Los Angeles to send me back. I was able to actually get some life-changing education outside of the classroom while I was there. I worked in a setting at a hospital that unfortunately no longer exists, but it was called King Drew in the middle of South Central LA. And I was fortunate enough to get a Ford Foundation kind of scholarship to work on urban poverty and public policy. And that was, like I said, life-changing for me and forever altered the way that I would view any space that I existed in, any space that I worked in. And I think taught me more than I ever learned in any other classroom. Organic chemistry didn't teach me anything compared to that. Since being back in Utah, I have become a physician. I'm a pediatrician and an emergency medicine physician. I'm a mom to a pretty fabulous transgender daughter who's actually at the Union because that's Skyline High's awards night. So she is here with me, but a little bit away. I have also embarked on preventing opioid overdose death through a program that my brother and I co-founded called Utah Naloxone. And it has a program that exists with the sole purpose of preventing preventable deaths. And those are the deaths that happen from opioid overdoses. Utah got itself up to the position of 4th in the nation in 2014. And that was the year that opioid overdose laws really became something here. We got naloxone access laws, Good Samaritan laws. And since then have been able to take the program from just working on overdose death prevention to more directly in the communities to providing syringe exchange services, infection prevention services, and we now offer a free clinic on First South and 525 East that is very specific care. It's not all services, but it's things related to people who use drugs. And as you might imagine, many of our folks are those who are unsheltered or are on the verge of being unsheltered. And so I have, again, had the privilege to learn from people who teach me by what their lives have taught them. And it's a space that I intend to continue to occupy and that I hopefully will be able to bring some more compassion, some more attention, as well as a more humanist side within the legislature, because folks are often viewed as less than or viewed as less deserving than, and really it is not okay by me. So I'm grateful for this opportunity to be able to be here, as well as to learn from what we're all going through and what we're all hoping to be better at in our communities. So thank you.
Great. Good evening, everybody. I'm Senator Derek Kitchen, and I've served in the Utah Senate for the last 4 years. Before that, I had the privilege of serving one term as a Salt Lake City council member. I represented downtown Central City, and the University of Utah neighborhood on the Salt Lake City Council, which is when I was first acquainted with Bill and others at Crossroads Urban Center and began to first work with the Coalition of Religious Communities and others. And I just want to say it's such a delight to be with you tonight. I'm running for re-election to the Utah State Senate. Many of you know that we have a super minority. I'm a Democrat. I represent Salt Lake City in the Utah legislature, and it comes with its fair share of challenges, as you might imagine. Utah's growing really fast. We are the fastest growing state in the whole country. In fact, the median age here in the state of Utah is just above 30 years old, if you can believe it. It's contributing to all kinds of excitement with our growth, but a lot of challenges as well. This growth is putting enormous pressure on our critical infrastructure. We're talking about more than just sewer and roads and our electrical grid. We're talking about housing. Our housing stock is under enormous strain right now. Our education system, including our K through 12 schools, especially right here in the Salt Lake City School District, under enormous pressure with this changing dynamic. We've got a lot of challenges on our hands right now. If you look just west here, we see a shrinking Great Salt Lake, which poses significant risks, not only to human health, but to the health and well-being of a very sensitive riparian corridor, one of the most important ecosystems in the North American continent. Flyover home to over 10 million migratory birds annually. Huge risks right now with our growth in the state, especially along the Wasatch Front. When it comes to housing, which has been the primary focus of my policy work over the last 7 years, both at the City Council and then most recently in the State Senate, housing will continue to be my #1 priority when I'm reelected to the State Senate. When I was on the City Council, the first thing I was able to accomplish was getting $21 million set aside for affordable housing, a significant cash investment that hadn't yet been seen in Salt Lake City up until that point. I moved forward with the accessory dwelling unit policy, which had stalled in the City Council for years. We opened that up so that we could add more housing units to our stock. I'm running low on time. I can't wait to talk more about housing. But at the end of the day, with our growth rate, we need to be focused on making sure that everybody who's struggling has a safe, stable roof so that they can move forward in their lives. And I'm so pumped to be with you tonight and talk about some solutions for the state of Utah. You're muted, Mr. Bill.
Well, yeah. Hey, well, thank you again, both for being here. I'm not used to having forums with people who are both such strong advocates in this area. This is as somebody who works on poverty issues and works on issues of homelessness and hunger. This is great. So I want to we sent each of you 3 questions, and we're going to give you 2 minutes each to answer them. The first question. We'll start with Senator Kitchen and then go to Dr. Plumb. Last year, bills to eliminate the sales tax on food were proposed in the House, but never got out of the House Rules Committee. Would you be willing to co-sponsor legislation in the Senate to eliminate the sales tax on food?
Awesome. I appreciate this question. Yeah, we actually had a Republican and a Democrat work on legislation in the House of Representatives last year to eliminate the sales tax on food. There is broad bipartisan consensus that we should do this. It speaks to the reality of the imbalance in our legislature that something like this can't even make it out of committee in the House. So we've got some real problems that we're up against when it comes to easing the strain on families in the state of Utah, especially those experiencing poverty. Yes, the short answer is I would absolutely sponsor a bill to eliminate the sales tax on food. In fact, I did. I worked on a tax reform bill this last year that actually outlined a way to pay for the offset of eliminating the sales tax on food, because one of the political hurdles that I hear time and time again is that, yeah, it sounds great to eliminate the sales tax on food, but what about the stable revenue stream that we get from sales tax on food? And I think that we need to overcome that as progressives in the state Senate by putting forward a proactive approach for how we might offset the cost there. And that's precisely what I did. And I will continue to do that when I'm reelected to the state Senate this year. So I'm pumped to keep working on this. I do see broad bipartisan support. So let's get it done.
Okay, I likewise absolutely would support and would co-sponsor and would go to whatever steps it would be to help that be a successful piece of legislation. We absolutely should not be taxing food, but I think it's just the start. I think that, it's for me, I'm a big believer in results and I'm a big believer on delivering on results. And I think that we have got to outline ways that we get our legislative body to work with us, those of us that are working on the more liberal issues, on the issues that are maybe historically seen as Democrat issues, left-leaning issues, to humanize these issues in such a way that we don't have the proverbial, kind of grudge matches over who's the winner and who's the loser. These are not bipartisan issues. These are nonpartisan human issues to me. And I think that for me, we've recently started in the emergency department. I work at Primary Children's. We've recently started assessing every patient that comes in and their family. What is their level of housing insecurity? What is their level of food insecurity? Do they have food to go home to for their next meal? And the numbers, although we don't have the data in yet to report, the numbers I think would horrify the majority of us and should horrify the legislature. And I think that what we need to do is find the strategies, find the ways to build the bridges so that we can actually get these critical needs met: a roof over people's head, housing, access to healthcare. These are basic human rights to me. And I think that we need to continue finding ways to build those bridges and get the results that our folks need.
Thank you so much, both of you. I think for the second question, we will start with Dr. Plumb and then go with Senator Kitchen. This year, the state of Washington passed a bill declaring that chronic homelessness is a medical condition and that permanent supportive housing is a form of healthcare. Would you support similar legislation in Utah and/or funding for building and operating permanent supportive housing?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that, Washington is on to something there, because we find ways within society to not turn our back on those who have what we call acceptable reasons to be living certain ways. And I don't mean to imply at all that I think there are acceptable reasons and not acceptable reasons. I am implying that there are folks within our policy realms as well as folks within our communities who basically make those distinctions. And I think it's a fabulous concept to say, no, this is actually part of their health. This is part of their wellness. And the fact that they are not being able to maintain stable housing, that they're chronically homeless, absolutely, I think that's on the kind of path that we can get solutions for folks. I also really believe, and I am not as well versed as I would like to be in all of the programs that exist, but I can tell you, watching what's happened even just at Palmer Court in the last 7 years since my brother and I very first started going there on outreach and education opportunities, to see people's lives really start to thrive when that pressure of the safety net of a house, the safety net of a roof over them has been relieved, and they can be more well. They can focus on their physical health as well as their mental health needs. It is therapy. It is not a medication, clearly, but it is a therapeutic intervention to give people housing, to give people that so that they can work on the other elements of their life that need the attention and the care. I would absolutely advocate for housing funding. I would certainly encourage our city as well as other cities. I mean, this can't just be a Salt Lake City problem, to do the same, that investments in housing, and not just luxury, studios that will house a single family. And I know this goes, or a single person. I know this goes a little bit into the next question, but we have got to look at housing for families. Putting up 500 square foot studios is not going to do it. So I saw that you forgot to stop the timer. I'm going to guesstimate that I was somewhere around 2 minutes. So there you go.
Yeah, I really appreciate this question. We had a bill this last year sponsored by Senator Jake Andreg to target the deficit of permanent supportive housing units in Salt Lake County, which I believe the most recent calculation was that we had a deficit of around 2,300 units of permanent supportive housing. The funding appropriated or requested to appropriate alongside this legislation was about $127 million. And we had that going along all the way through the session up until the very last week, when all of a sudden that was chopped more than in half. So this year we ended up funding about $55 million toward a permanent supportive housing fund, which no doubt will get us part of the way there to closing that gap in our permanent supportive housing need in Salt Lake County. But ultimately, we have the money in the bank as a state. We had a huge surplus this year, in fact, and we still refuse to fully fund services and the needs for our population, especially along the Wasatch Front. If we really want to get our arms around people experiencing homelessness and meaningfully lift them out of poverty and onto a track of healing and restoration in their lives, housing has got to be number one. We learned this already as a city. Look at what we did back in 2012, 2013, and 2014 in Salt Lake City. We had a Housing First initiative that was a partnership with the VA. And what we found is that when people are given access to housing, stable housing, so much in their life automatically starts to fall into place. You know, they start accessing benefits that they already qualify for. They can start applying for jobs because they have an address, right? Family relationships that have been estranged start coming back into focus. Housing is so critical if we really want to get our arms around the issues of poverty in our community. There's something called social determinants of health. And this is critical for the community at large to acknowledge if we're ever going to meaningfully move the needle on poverty. And housing is one of those things because it provides a meaningful approach to stabilizing somebody's individual situation. So at the end of the day, I hope all of you who are listening today, or perhaps streaming this after the fact, will join me and other Democrats and Republicans that have been pushing for housing year over year over year, and yet are met with resistance by those that make the decisions in the Utah legislative process. We can invest in housing. We should invest in housing. There's no excuses. It's time to do it.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry. I'm nobody's watching this to listen to me talk, but I'm going to do it for a second because we are actually gearing up to do a survey of people who are in permanent supportive housing and people who are at a shelter or living on the street. We're going to start that in a couple of weeks, and our goal is to document first off that housing is healthcare, that people who get into housing sleep better, they actually access other services more often, they're more likely to be to actually get some preventative care. We're hoping that's what it'll show. I know this, it will show some of those things. I think in terms of, your bipartisan support for this, I mean, it's important to give the credit to Governor Cox for actually putting the $127 million that his homelessness czar, Wayne Niederhauser, proposed in his budget, right? I mean, that was an unprecedented act of leadership by a Republican governor. And I think the legislature actually passed a measure that allows us for the first time, and we're actually going to be one of the first states to do this, to use Medicaid funding to pay for case management, both at permanent supportive housing places and to some extent at shelters. It's going to take some time to figure out how to do it right. But I think that we're in the process of, I mean, ideally we're building toward a world where nobody is released from the state hospital to the shelter. Nobody's released from the hospital to the shelter, and nobody's released from the jail knowing that they have serious mental illness and nowhere to go but the shelter, right? I mean, that should be the goal, is the system. People show up at the shelter, people become homeless for long term, for 12 months and more, because they fell through other cracks. And so as we look toward better integrating healthcare with housing, I mean, the ultimate goal should be that if people never need a higher level of care than a shelter could ever provide, they don't actually ever end up in a shelter. That would be the optimal system. It's a coalition of religious community, so I have to preach a little bit. Our last question that we sent everyone, we'll start with Senator Kitchen and then end with Dr. Plumb, and it's the time of life when a person in this country is most likely to become homeless is infancy. Would you support funding and or legislation to spur the production of more low-income housing that meets the needs of families with children? And just a little addition to that, I think there's recently been news coverage talking about how some areas of the county, the housing prices have gone up so much that families with children can't afford to live there anymore. So they're having to close schools. I think there are all kinds of impacts when you don't plan for including moderate income, low and working families in all of the neighborhoods in the county. There are people who just get left out, and that. So I will stop. If I keep on talking, you're going to forget the question, so I'm going to stop.
Thanks, Bill. I really like this question, especially because it hits Senate District 9 really hard. You know, this is the urban core of not only Salt Lake County, but the state of Utah. We're seeing skyrocketing housing prices, not only throughout the Wasatch Front, but especially it's pronounced right here in Senate District 9. We are seeing a lot of development of housing, but very few units are 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms. So a 4-bedroom housing development is almost unheard of in this district, by the way. And Salt Lake City School District in particular is one of those districts that you're referring to that is faced with the prospect of closing schools and restructuring the way they do business. So, long story short is we've got to be building more moderate and low income housing for families. 3+ bedrooms, right? When it comes to supporting families and preventing homelessness down the road, early childhood education is the biggest thing that we can focus on as well, in addition to stable housing. In my committee, Economic Development and Workforce Services, which I've served on for the last 4 years, all of the housing and homelessness initiatives are vetted through this committee. And we also discuss early childhood education, pre-K. As you may remember from this last legislative session, we did fund a good chunk of all-day kindergarten, which is a good thing for a lot of Utahns, but we didn't go all the way. That's the thing. This is the story of Utah these days, is we have the big vision, but we only go halfway, right? We know what we need to do, but we just take half measures. And we're faced with some serious problems here in our community, and we can't afford to do these half measures any longer, whether that's investments in housing or funding our education system. We need to fund all-day kindergarten, and we need to focus on that early childhood education piece, because the research shows that when you give a child the opportunity to an early education, hands-on education, structured environments, they produce much better down the road. They have more stable learning environments. They have higher test scores. Everything falls into place in a much more streamlined way when we make those early investments. I will say that no matter what we do as Democrats, the good ideas tend to get absorbed by Republicans. And you see that with early childhood education. This last session with Ann Milner, we worked on every interim meeting on this early childhood education bill. And then at the very end, all of a sudden it gets absorbed into Ann Milner's omnibus bill, which I'm glad it passed. But at the end of the day, sometimes these initiatives that we push forward get absorbed. But a good idea is a good idea. So let's keep pushing on it.
So as you might imagine, the children and kids and the future that they are for us is a fairly important area to me. And I feel very strongly that especially within Salt Lake and Salt Lake County, our focus on providing a certain number of housing units that doesn't necessarily meet the needs that are out there has been, unfortunate. And I don't fault that those units exist or that those units came to be. But I think that the planning and perhaps even where the incentivization has been off. There has not been, I mentioned in the last question, there has not been a focus on, not even to mention affordable housing, deeply affordable housing available for families. And what option does that leave? None. There is none. If you don't have a couch to surf on it at a friend's or a family member's house, if you don't have someone to take you in and you have 2 kids, 3 kids, 4 kids, you're on the streets. That's it. And I think that for a state that really prides itself on the way that we care for our children, or that we proclaim to care for our children, is abhorrent. I personally think that in some of these areas where it is going to be a struggle for a particular party, whether that's the minority party or not. I personally don't need to have ownership of any piece of legislation. I think that syringe exchange legislation that we got through was done with a Republican. And I think that sometimes that's the strategy that needs to be taken. Sometimes you need to find the spaces where someone who can get traction that you can't get takes the wheel and makes things happen. And perhaps that's part of what we need to be encouraging within our communities, is that this concept of poverty and of homelessness and of lack of resources all across the board, education, healthcare, all of them, it isn't a Democratic issue anymore. It's a Utah issue. And for me, I love to talk about priorities. I love to talk about the things that really matter to me, but what I really like is to be able to deliver results. And so my goal is to be a senator, a legislator that actually can get in there and get results delivered, because our issues at hand are far too important not to.
Yeah, this is something that we are going to be pushing on. I mean, this will be a priority for us. I mean, we feel like there needs to be dedicated funding at the state and local level for specifically to spur the production of more family-sized units. I think that it just costs more money to build and operate larger units, and so we need to, developers need incentives to make deals work out with the banks to build studios. They need more help to get approval from the bank to build 3-bedroom units. So I think anyway, but so you'll be hearing more about that. But I want to give each of you a chance to say what, to go out with the closing remarks. So we'll start with Senator Kitchen, and with Dr. Plumb. You each get 3 minutes.
Well, thank you so much for prioritizing this conversation and for inviting both Dr. Plumb and myself to have this conversation with you. Sounds like we agree on a lot of things when it comes to supporting the Coalition of Religious Communities and people experiencing poverty. And so that makes me feel really excited about the future of democracy, at least within the Democratic Party. The issues that we share are really important to our community, and you can count on me to continue to champion the issues related to poverty, related to emotional, behavioral, and mental health care, substance use treatment, and others, as well as advocating for housing as a human right. I fundamentally believe housing is something that, and stability is something that we deserve access to. I've really appreciated the opportunity to work with the Coalition of Religious Communities, Crossroads Urban Center, and others over the last 7 years in public service here in Salt Lake City. Obviously looking at new infrastructure dollars as they come through, and reframing housing as a type of infrastructure is a big term policy question that I've been really focused on over the last little while. In fact, last January, Bill Tibbetts and I here, we had a similar webinar where we made the case that infrastructure is housing and vice versa. Over the last couple of years, I've had the pleasure of working with you all on prioritizing LGBTQ elder housing, as we know that people early in life and later in life are more vulnerable, and especially those that have characteristics that may be outside of the usual when it comes to their lived experience. So supporting our LGBTQ elders, huge priority for me, and I appreciate Bill Tibbetts bringing this to my attention over the last couple of years. Last year, we worked on a $15 million appropriation in order to leverage almost $160 million in private activity bonds. This is your issue that I championed in the legislature. So proud of that work, and thank you so much. And finally, this last year, that Olympics resolution that got so much attention and seems to be getting a bit of attention out there on the campaign trail, that came from you, Coalition of Religious Communities and Crossroads Urban Center, outlining the fact that when we make big investments like bringing the Olympics to the state of Utah, that we must make sure that it is designed in a way that uplifts the community far beyond when the games leave our community. That includes housing as infrastructure, like I already mentioned. So I want to thank you, Bill. I want to thank everybody who's tuning in for prioritizing issues related to poverty and making it my issue as well. So thank you so much. I look forward to earning your support once again.
All right. Well, I think an area that I'd like to touch on as we wrap this up is the area of opioid settlement funding that is coming to the state. And something that I think that you will be interested to know is, so as part of the Utah Opioid Task Force, we have an opioid settlement advisory committee trying to help guide policy makers both in the state and at county and municipal levels on how they can use these funds, which are truly, this is an unprecedented opportunity. And when we asked folks what should be prioritized, and these are the subject matter experts, 200 of them across the state, when we asked them, where are the gaps? Well, treatment. There's folks that say, yeah, there's treatment gaps, although we've gotten much better access to treatment with Medicaid expansion. It's obviously not perfect, and there's a huge need, especially in the realm of detox. But one of the top 5 prioritizations of subject matter experts across the state was access to housing and maintenance of housing. And so I think that $266 million as it stands now coming into the state over a number of years, helping the state find ways to use this money responsibly, to not let it get directed to for-profit entities, to entities that have good, sexy, shiny new ideas, when in reality, if we want to help people get well from within the space of their opioid use and their opioid use disorder, if it goes that far, getting them housed, getting them access to education and job training, getting social legal partnerships where we can get records expunged, getting those recovery supports in place so that people can get their lives on a track that is worth maintaining wellness for, is going to be huge. So that's an area that in particular, I feel really passionate about remaining engaged in, about helping guide the state with a number of collaborative partners, because there is no one way and one person's idea that is the best idea. The way that we do things well is we take the folks who are experts in specific realms, we work together with them, we don't battle, we don't, have those matches. We find ways to represent each other's similar concerns, and where they overlap, ultimately representing the concerns and needs of our constituents and our community members, our neighbors, our friends, our families. So I could not agree more that this is a very kind of invigorating as well as also optimism inspiring dialogue, because it is a reminder that there are a lot of folks out there who care about the population, who very often feels literally swept into a dumpster. And I think that I have so much hope that we can work together as coalitions, that we can work together as advocates for humans, period, to do right by them, and that we can find ways to bring those folks in who have been impediments in the past to be help now, to join the coalition concept now. So truly, Bill, thank you so much for this opportunity and for the work that you do out there, not only for individuals, but for the other groups that work in this realm. I'm very, very grateful.
Well, thank you both so much for making time to talk with me and with the people who will watch the video, which will be on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel and on our website, and we'll send it out on our emails to people. And I was thinking, I've been at Crossroads for over 20 years, and during that time, I've done a lot of candidate forums and a lot of meet the candidate things. This year, we're bringing back our Meet the Candidates barbecue, which is on July 13th. You'll get an invitation to that later. But I think, this is, first it made me nervous, and then over time, I realized actually, I've met some just amazing people, doing events, talking to candidates. Like almost anybody throws their hat into the ring, is an interesting person. So thank you both so much. But I would say this is the first time where I've done a forum where both of the participants are heroes of mine. So this is pretty great. Thank you so much.
Well, right back at you, and thank you. Take good care of yourself out there.
Okay, bye.
Good night, everybody.